Hello, and welcome to Book to Podcast from AudioBite, all about raising online profiles and presence of published and soon-to-be-published authors. In the next half hour or so, you'll have an intimate introduction to the author and their book. For more details, please visit audio-bite.co.uk. And now, here's your host, Viva Yulu.
Today's Book to Podcast is with Leigh Ashton. Leigh is the author of I Sell, Unlock Your Winning Sales Mindset. She's also a speaker, trainer and coach, and since 1986 she has trained thousands of sales and business professionals as well as business owners to use psychology to make positive changes to their attitudes, approach and sales results. Companies turn to Leigh when they've tried everything to increase their sales productivity and they're still not getting the results they want. So welcome to Book to Podcast.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very good, thanks very much. Busy as usual, which is great. So, no, all is good.
So how did you come to write I Sell?
Well, I'd spent so many years working with sales professionals and business owners, and I realised that in order to reach more people, I had to add on different methodologies to reach those people, because there are only so many people that I can get onto workshops. There are only so many companies that I can personally train. So my thoughts were really, how can I help business owners and sales professionals be more effective? And also my motivation is to take the fearful and scary out of sales, because so many people find it challenging and it really can be so much fun. And the book is all about taking the fearful and scary elements out of sales and making people realise that actually the more of themselves they are, the greater chance they have of generating huge sales success.
I don't think people see that, especially if they're working for an organisation. They have deadlines, they have targets, and the specific things you've set out in this book that could help sales leaders support their staff. So we'll talk about that later on. Well, let's dive right in. And the first chapter, which is how your thinking determines your sales success. And who are you targeting? And what are the key aspects that people should take away from this chapter?
I'm targeting anybody that needs to generate sales. So they may be a salesperson or a sales manager or a business owner or a director of a business. If their responsibility is to generate new business or more business from existing clients, then all the chapters really are relevant. And in this first chapter, what I really aim to do is to explain how people let their mind get in the way of really great sales, because the mind has the ability to do incredible things. Some of those things are really powerful and positive, but some of those things paralyze people with fear and with thoughts that aren't even real. So the first chapter is all about understand that the mind is an incredible thing. Actually, you have control over your mind. It doesn't have to control you. So that's what the first chapter is all about, just laying the foundations and starting to generate the thought that, well, actually, I know I might think like this, but I don't have to think like this. There are other ways that I can think that are going to be more helpful and support me in being a great salesperson.
Yeah. And you talk about going into the valley. What do you mean by that?
I think that everyone will relate to the valley once I explain what it is. The valley is a place that we go to that consumes us with the reasons and excuses that really allow us to let ourselves off the hook. So the kind of things that I hear when people are in the valley is, I haven't got the time, I haven't got the money, the economy is challenged, nobody's got any money, everything's going wrong, we haven't got this, we haven't got that. And all of these external factors that are external of our own thinking, once we buy into that as the reason for a poor performance or a lower performance, actually those reasons and excuses keep us in the valley. And if you imagine being in the bottom dip of a valley, it means that you can't see the landscape, you can't see the options open to you, and so you are stuck at the bottom unless you get out. And the only way you can get out of the valley is to come up with an action that you can take to get you out of the valley, because when you're in the valley, it's a place of non-action, and that doesn't mean you won't get any sales, it just means you'll only get the sales that you were going to get anyway.
That's interesting, actually. I don't think people would see it that way. And one of the things that you do in this chapter is there's an exercise at the end of it. Describe your thinking when you set out this exercise and what this exercise will actually help people do.
Well, every chapter of this book encourages the reader to come up with 3 actions that reading each chapter will generate for them. And these are actions that are going to leverage their ability to generate sales. Now, the actions actually will be very different for everybody, and people will read the book, and the things that resonate with them, that actually, oh yeah, I recognise that as a barrier for me, will generate the actions that they come up with. And the reason I say just choose 3 is if there are 3 actions, they're more likely to be done. And it's about generating habits. Let's read something useful, let's take some action, because they say knowledge is power, but it's only power if you put it into action.
Yes.
So the book is really designed to give the reader the opportunity to reflect on what they've learned, to come up with actions that will help them and really support them in, okay, so let's do this.
I think it's quite important in the first chapter to lay out this foundation, because as we go through the other chapters we're going to talk about, we'll see that once we've done this, then it makes it a lot easier to attempt the other things in the other chapter.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a very progressive book in that it starts off very simple, and in fact it's simple all the way through. It's a very easy book to read. You know, there's no jargon, it's all in language. You know, when I was writing it, I was thinking of a specific person. I also wanted it to be understood by, if a teenager read it, they would be able to understand it even if they'd never done sales. So it progressively builds on the last chapter. Each chapter is like an evolution and a development, so the reader actually can start off with very basic knowledge of sales and actually by the end of the book be quite skillful.
That's true. So let's move on to the second chapter, where you talk about how your beliefs impact your thinking and the results that we have. And you're really trying to focus on behaviors and specifically how negative beliefs really affect the way we act.
Yeah, you know, beliefs are core to who we are. And the interesting thing about beliefs is that they're not even real. A belief is our interpretation of an event or a situation that has happened to us. So the wonderful thing about beliefs is that once they're in place, you take them to be truths. But we are changing beliefs all the time. And in the way that children believe in Santa Claus, a 78-year-old person knows that Santa Claus isn't actually a real character. Well, he might be, but that might be a belief, mightn't it, that isn't actually true. But we think that, we know Santa doesn't come down the chimney and deliver presents. So we change our beliefs all the time. Things happen around us. And positive, empowering beliefs are really great at creating positive and empowering behaviours. So if you think you're really good at something, then guess what? You really are. It's the negative beliefs that we believe about ourselves and others that actually get in the way of being a great salesperson. And if you believe, for example, that you're not very good on the telephone, or you're not very good at talking to a specific age group or a specific gender, or you just think you're not smart enough for this job and somebody's going to find out very soon that actually you're a fraud. You know, they talk about that syndrome. And whatever you believe will actually control the behaviour that you do. So if you think you're not very good at something, then the behaviour, it's like you don't give it 100% because you don't believe you're good at it anyway. And then when it doesn't work, you go, there, I told you so. I'm not very good at this. When people say, oh, I'm rubbish at spelling, or I'm rubbish at this, or I'm rubbish at that, a great word to add to that is yet. Really, the success of something is really all about strategies. And if you're good at something, it just means you've got a great strategy. If you're not good, it just means that the strategy you're using isn't effective. Yeah. But it really develops our beliefs about ourselves in a way that will either nurture you or paralyse you.
And in the book, you outline 3 limiting beliefs that you found from your experience. So what are these beliefs?
Well, they fall into 3 categories. The first is limiting beliefs of hopelessness. That is where you believe it is absolutely impossible for anyone to achieve what you want. So, for example, in the 50s, they felt it was impossible. They believed it was impossible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. That your heart and lungs would explode and the bones in your legs would shatter. So that was a limiting belief of hopelessness until Roger Bannister did it, and then that broke the spell. Limiting beliefs of helplessness are where, well, other people can do it, but I can't. And a typical one might be, well, I didn't go to university, and it's okay for Richard Branson, he dropped out and he could do it, but I don't believe that I could because I didn't have a university education, for example. And the third, which is in my experience the most common, is limiting beliefs of worthlessness. And that sounds very melodramatic.
Yeah.
and I really don't like the label, but that's the label that have been placed on these beliefs. And these are limiting beliefs around, I don't deserve this, I'm not good enough, or questioning, am I? I don't believe I am actually good enough to do this job. Am I good enough to do this job? Am I good enough to be a great salesperson? And it's those kind of beliefs, I would say, are most prominent in 95% of the people that I work with.
Really?
Yeah.
And why do you think that's most prominent?
Because I think people doubt their ability. They doubt their ability. And it's very easy for limiting beliefs of that nature to be instilled. And, in the book I explain how the root of all limiting beliefs occurs between the ages of 0 and 7 years of age. So it's when a child is learning to do stuff. So when they are unable to do something, and maybe they don't ride their bike as good as Johnny, or maybe they only got 8 out of 10 in their spelling test and Susie got 10 out of 10. That's where the start of limiting beliefs occur. When a child thinks, oh, I'm not as good as that person, or I'm not as good as that person, and then that transposes to, well, I'm not very good at exams, I'm not very good at interviews, I'm not very good at getting promotion, I'm not very good at this, and that really becomes engulfed in performance anxiety.
And I can imagine if in a sales team, having one person who's more successful than the other, the one who's less successful and has this limiting beliefs would just be under so much pressure.
Yeah, people get real inferiority complexes, and you often hear people who are not performing very well, they just get the best leads, or they're in the valley. Instead of exploring, okay, so what could I do differently that would create the same success? Because the interesting thing is that salespeople are very different creatures. We're all very different creatures in whatever role we perform, and a strategy that works for one person may not work for another. I truly believe that if you embrace who you are as an individual and your outcome is to really help the other person, the potential buyer, and you come from a space of what do you need and how can I help you get what you want, I think you will automatically close more sales. So one of the things I say is stop selling. If you believe that you have to be a certain kind of person to sell, actually you don't. You just need to be you.
It sounds so simple, but it's true for people who find it really challenging to try and succeed like somebody else rather than just be their own person. Find their own sweet spot. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next chapter, which is managing your inner software to achieve more sales. And if we could just sort of lead into that now.
This chapter is all about understanding the way that you are hardwired. Why do you do certain things in a certain way? All of us are hardwired. And what I mean by hardwired is if you imagine that your body is the hardware, the inner software is your operating system. So it's Windows or OS. And within that operating system are all these different programs that you use. Now, I'm a PC girl, so I'll refer to Excel or Word or Publisher or all the different programs that you can get on Windows. And human beings are just like that. So the people that you get on most with are the people that have similar preferences to you. And so what you find is that every salesperson or every business owner will have their very favourite clients because they get on better with those. And the interesting thing is that when you understand the hard wiring of an individual, and it really is very simple. The book lays out very simply how you can do this in conversation. You don't need any psychometric test. Once you've identified the way a person is hardwired, you can tailor your communication to hit their sweet spot. It's like if you imagine a bow and arrow and you imagine your communication is the arrow, you're trying to hit the bullseye with your communication with every person that you come into contact with. You want a communication to be really effective. You want the other person to engage and really get what you're trying to communicate. And understanding the hard wiring means that you know where the bullseye is, because you're not just firing it always in one location, because people's bullseyes are in different places. So the salesperson that uses the same script or the same approach will find that, I don't know why this works with some people and not others. It's because that everybody they come into contact with is different. And this chapter actually shares how you can recognise those differences, and also what is the best thing to say to people with those specific preferences, and also what not to do for them, what to avoid.
And this is where the profile questionnaire comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, there is a profile questionnaire for some of the preferences, and many of your listeners, Viv, will have come across representational systems. And there's also not so much a questionnaire, but some guiding questions for an area known as meta programs, which are much deeper psychological preferences, which is an area that is absolutely fascinating and really allows you to understand other people in a much, much deeper way.
I think clear is that this is psychology of selling, and people might wonder, it's selling, it doesn't have to be hard work. It's when you get the bare essence, which is the software of who you are and who your customers are, then it makes it easier. So you almost have a running template of how to approach people.
Well, I think that you do have a running template. Once you've identified their particular preferences, you know what behaviour that you need to adopt. And the other thing is that once you identify your own, you'll be able to have much greater control of your thinking. Because every time you have a thought, you know the reason behind that thought. Oh, that's because this is my preference. Actually, in this situation, that doesn't help me. So how can I tailor that thought to help me in this situation? And the other thing is that once you understand these principles, sales stops being hard. It becomes easy and it becomes fun, because every time I meet somebody new, it's like a new investigation. I feel like a detective. I have to find out about this person, and it makes it really interesting, and every human being is exciting. No one irritates you because you just think, oh, that's interesting behaviour. That must mean that they have this preference. It all becomes a bit of a game in a way. You're like putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, And instead of people irritating you, you just accept, oh, that's because they have this preference and that's the reason they do that. And it's also very liberating, and it's also very forgiving of other people, because what we find irritating in someone else, actually, people will find things irritating in us. So we can forgive ourselves and we can forgive others.
You've put it so simply, I have to say. And I prepared for this interview, doing some research within the book, but not reading everything. But hearing you explain it to me like this, I'm going to go use this book now for myself.
Yeah, good luck. Honestly, it makes it so much fun.
Yeah, it does. And in chapter 9, where you talk about putting it all together, you give suggestions on open questions. You talk about income producing activity and the fastest business impact. What do you mean by open questions?
Now, an open question is a question that induces dialogue. What I find is when people are a little bit under pressure, so if they're in a sales situation and they're not totally comfortable, they seem to resort to closed questions. And a closed question is a question that people answer yes or no to. So there's no dialogue. And the sad thing is they're under pressure and they only have 1 or 2 seconds to come up with the next question. So they're increasing the pressure that they're putting on themselves. And it also gives very little information, because they're deciding what the frame of reference is, and the other person is just saying yes or no, you're right or you're not right. And the interesting thing about that too is you actually are leading the other person, because they're your frame of reference. So I think it's far more useful to ask open questions that allows the other person to choose where they want to go. And it's much more engaging for the other person, because they're doing most of the talking. Open questions really lead to a lot of dialogue. There's only one open question that I believe is not really acceptable in a sales conversation, and that is a why questions.
You mean people ask that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every single training program I run includes a session on open questions, and I give them 5 or 10 minutes to come up with as many open questions as they can, and there is always why questions there.
So you can't ask her, so why did you say this? Or
Yeah, why did you choose the other supplier? Why did you go for this service?
So how would you rephrase that then?
I always say, what makes you think that's a better fit for you? Or what makes you think that's a better fit in terms of supplier? What questions give you criteria? When you ask a why question, it actually creates a negative internal state in the other person, because they feel they need to justify. Yeah. And when they do that, their answer is emotional rather than factual. So the information that you get may not be as useful as you think it is.
Yeah. That is so true. I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. And one of the other things you talk about is income producing activity. What do you mean by that?
Well, I believe that when a person focuses on income producing activity, and that's the activity from the start of a relationship to the time that the person who's buying says, yes, I'm going ahead. So anything that happens before that point is income producing activity. What happens after that point is invoice producing activity, and it's servicing the customer. And I think a lot of salespeople and business owners focus on servicing customers more than they do on income producing activity, because this servicing the customer's more fun. And
they've already got the deal.
Yeah, and it's much easier. It's probably less outside of their comfort zone. Where income producing activities like networking, creating emails that attract attention, it's meetings, writing proposals, making sure that the copy on your website is as engaging as it can be. It's all the stuff that starts and maintains relationships with your prospective buyers before they say yes. And I say to business owners, I say they should be spending 1/3 of their time on IPA, income producing activity, because if they don't, they won't be generating enough clients to invoice. So if they've got peaks and troughs in their cash flow, they need to spend more time on income producing activity to generate new clients.
And in this chapter, you also talk about rapport. What do you mean by? I know. Is it rapport, building a rapport with the prospective client?
I think you need to build a rapport with everyone that you come into contact with.
Even if they're a sales prospect?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you have an outcome to connect with another person, the only way you can do that is to get into rapport. If you want your communication to be really effective, you can only do that with rapport. Because as soon as you're out of rapport with somebody, they're not listening to you. So it doesn't matter what job you're in or what role or your career you're in, to be effective, you have to understand the other person, and the only way you're going to do that is to get into rapport, ask them open questions so you really understand them, and then you can communicate with them in a way that's right, and hey presto, rapport. And then everybody wins, don't they?
Yeah.
Because you understand the other person and you can give them what they want in terms of the communication or the offer. They understand you, they feel connected to you, it's more likely to have trust when that happens, and it's just a more pleasurable experience, and I can't understand why you wouldn't want that.
Yeah, that's true. And then one of the last chapters that we're talking about today is chapter 10, which is if you manage a sales team, and this is giving team leaders an opportunity to manage effectively. What are the best ways for a sales leader to motivate their team?
I think it's really important for a sales leader to think of their team as their customers. That would be the first thing. They have to understand those individuals in the same way that they make an effort to understand their customers, because each people in their team will have very different motivations. They'll have very different preferences. If they understand those individuals and the preferences, the motivations, why are they doing what they do? If they understand that and they connect with them in the same way that they do with their customers, then they will have a much better relationship, and therefore they'll get much better buy-in from that team.
What would be your top sales leadership tips that you talk about in this book?
I think it's really important, firstly, to believe in your team, because if you have doubts about an individual in your team, your communication will reflect that. Even if you say the same thing to every member, the tone of your voice will be different for a person that you think is not going to make the grade. And I've found time and time again that when you believe in people, they step up to that level, they step up to the plate. And it's really important, first of all, to have belief. It's really important not to tell them what to do.
Oh, explain that.
Well, when a salesperson goes along to their sales manager and says, I'm not sure how to do this, like, what do you think? The natural tendency, and this comes from a place of loving and caring, is to say, well, just do it like this, and you want to give that person help, but actually you're disempowering every time you do that, because if they have to come to you for the solution, it means they're not thinking about it. And I've gone into many organisations and they say to me, our people were just not proactive in selling. They have to be led. And when you explore, it's because their leader has constantly for years said, I want you to do this, I want you to do it like that, do this, do that. And they've been instructing and the salespeople have been following. I say you train people how to treat you. And if you train them not to think for themselves by giving them instruction all the time, and then suddenly you get upset that they're not being proactive, let's look at yourself for a minute. How did you contribute to creating this problem? So it's really about when one of your team come along to you and they have a problem, it's like, well, I've got some thoughts, but what do you think? If any of my team do that and they're kind of in the ballpark, I go, that sounds like a plan. Go ahead and do that. I think it's really important to let people scuff their knees in order to learn. Because if you imagine with a child, for example, if you were worried about that child falling over and hurting themselves, as a parent you might be around the child when they're very small and they're a little bit wobbly, but you can't be around that child every second of every day. And if you're also creating a dependency on you, because it's like, oh, I better not go for a walk because I might fall over. Mum's not around to hold me in case. So I know that sounds a bit extreme, but that's what every sales leader does when they tell a salesperson how to do something. The other side of that is that a salesperson doesn't know what they don't know. But in order for them to learn, they have to try first, and then you go, okay, so let's tweak that. How can we tweak that? And you do it through discussion rather than telling. And the other thing that you can do is when somebody comes to you and says, well, this is what I think, if they're way off course, it's because they haven't thought of something. And then your question might be, oh yeah, well that sounds okay. What would happen if? And then you give them the ingredient that they're missing so they can go, oh yes, I hadn't thought of that. Well, maybe if I tweaked it this way. So you need, in order for salespeople to be proactive, they need to develop the muscle to be proactive.
Does it require a certain type of person to be a sales leader?
Oh, very much so. If somebody wants to keep taking all the glory for themselves, they probably won't make a great sales leader. Because being a great sales leader is all about caring for your team and wanting them to take the glory. And it's about them believing that they are the glory. And if you step away, they're still going to do what they should be doing for the organisation. They still want to do it. It's about creating a desire. I see my role as a sales leader very much as, I'm a bit like a social worker or a counsellor or a sounding board. In fact, you can take on many roles as a sales leader because salespeople generate more sales when they're happy. In fact, there's a Harvard study that says 37% more sales are generated by happy salespeople. So the happier your sales team, the more they will produce. I see my role as a sales leader of making sure that my people are happy.
That's been quite enlightening. Anyone listening to this, I think you do yourself well and you will serve your business well if you went and purchased this book. And this book is available on Amazon, I presume?
Yeah, Amazon in book form or for Kindle, and it's a very low-cost investment in understanding how psychology affects you, affects your customers, affects your team. And then because I've been in sales for 29 years, there's lots of little sales tricks of the trade, as I call them, that will really easy to implement. Everything I do is very easy to implement.
Thank you very much, Leigh. If you've been listening to this as Book to Podcast on AudioBite, go to
sales-consultancy.com.
For more interviews on AudioBite, it's www.audio-bite.co.uk. See you next time on Book to Podcast, and thanks for listening.